The delegates are also reviewing the final synthesis document, which summarizes the discussions that took place at the Synod. EWTN News Contributor Catherine Hadro has been part of our special daily Synod coverage all week from our Vatican Bureau, and she joins us now to discuss this last full week of the Synod meetings. Catherine, welcome. Before we get into the Synod, the scandal of Slovenian priest and theologian Marko Rupnik, whose art is prominently featured at the shrine to Our Lady of Lourdes in France, has erupted and caused even more heartbreak for victims of abuse. Tell us what happened.
Well, Montse, these are heinous allegations facing famed mosaic artist Father Marko Rupnik, former Jesuit. Heinous allegations involving sexual, spiritual, psychological abuse that the Jesuits found to be highly credible. That's why I say he's a former Jesuit, because the Jesuit order did an investigation into these allegations, found them to be highly credible. Father Rupnik was even excommunicated for a brief period before the Jesuit order ultimately kicked him out over disobedience. And this week, the news was that we learned that a diocese in Slovenia had accepted Rupnik back into active ministry. You can imagine the outcry that poured out as soon as this broke.
Absolutely. And it's said that the Synod delegates did hear about this on Monday. And after a few days of silence, the Holy Father has responded, as well as the Synod, although many say it's not enough. What did the statement released from the Vatican say, and what else was said?
So today, the Vatican did release a statement. Pope Francis asked the Vatican's Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith to, quote, review the case, and decided to lift the statute of limitations to allow a trial to take place. So this means there will now officially be an investigation into these allegations. And one possible outcome of this investigation is that Father Rupnik could be laicized. Now, the Holy See statement that was released today also said that the Church must learn from the Synod that is, again, in its final days here, to listen attentively and compassionately, which you mentioned this letter to the people of God that came out to the faithful earlier this week. In that very letter, similar language was used there because the Synod participants said in a letter to the faithful to listen to victims of abuse.
And that's significant, and I know that our entire EWTN News team will be watching that story. Let's go back to the Synod. A few minutes ago, we heard Archbishop Broglio, head of the USCCB, talk about the importance of listening during the Synod, which is enriched by the diversity of voices from around the world. That was also something that struck Bishop Robert Barron, who talked to Vatican correspondent Colin Flynn. Let's take a listen to that.
We tend to see the world through the rather myopic lenses of the West. And you realize very quickly it's very different in other parts of the world. And issues that preoccupy us in the Western world often do not preoccupy people in other parts of the world at all. In fact, on the contrary. And that, I think, has been one of the interesting dynamics of the Synod.
Catherine, in your reporting at the Synod, does that diversity of cultures also bring a diversity of priorities? Or has there been unity in what is being discussed for this final report?
There's definitely been that diversity of thought, and I've heard from multiple people. It's really been beautiful to see the universal church be brought together in this way. But I spoke with one source who is a voting delegate, and this source made the point that because a lot of these discussions are actually timed, there's time limits to them, they're limited in their ability to really tussle and debate and really have profound debate over issues that are more sensitive and more delicate. And so this source of mine was saying they really wished there was just a little bit more opportunity to fully grapple with this. At the same time, I've heard over and over again in various conversations that the fact that the Synod is bringing people together who have various viewpoints, who might be totally ideologically opposed and otherwise would not choose to sit next to each other, are being invited to sit down with each other at this table. And could this be, in fact, a remedy to the polarization that we are marked by during these times and these echo chambers that we all find ourselves in? The fact that you are sitting next to someone who you otherwise would not have spoken to, that is something that has been a fruit, I would say, that we've heard of.
Definitely something worth noting. What you mentioned about these hot button issues, there is a lot of back and forth on the issue of women. And one of the Synod participants, Renee Kohler-Ryan, had this to say.
I think that the more we associate the priesthood with power that is understood in purely secular terms, the more we're feeding clericalism. And it seems that at least some of the women who are advocating for female priesthood see the priest as the one with the most authority in a local community, and so that's what they want, that authority. So I think that it does in some way feed into this problem of clericalism.
Pope Francis has also stressed that clericalism is bad. What are you hearing about how the Synod might respond to the question of ordaining women?
Pope Ryan was definitely very vocal against these calls for the ordination of women. This is really important. There was some big news that broke just this week while we were here in Rome. A new book, an Italian interview book with Pope Francis, was released this week. It was actually released in Spanish over the summer. But in it, Pope Francis is very clear that holy orders is reserved for men. He has once again said, this conversation about the ordination of women, that is closed. That door is closed. It's not going to happen. Also this week at a press conference for the Synod, Cardinal Prevost, who's with the dicastery for bishops, he said that clericalizing women does not solve a problem. In fact, it could create more problems, which is, again, a significant thing to hear from a high-up Synod delegate in these final days of the Synod. But again, we know these discussions have been happening. There have been some tense discussions over this topic in the Synod halls. But this is key. Just because something is being discussed does not mean that's what's being decided.
That's interesting. Well, should the faithful then be expecting any surprises in the summary document released this weekend? And when will it actually be released, Catherine?
Well, they will be voting on Saturday, and it's going to be expected to be released quite late on Saturday. We now know they are going to be voting paragraph by paragraph through this very thorough document, which again synthesizes all of the discussions that have been had over this month. So that's going to be a huge undertaking. We're expecting it late on Saturday, and then we will know. But something I want to stress for anyone who might have some anxiety over what could be included in this synthesis document, this is an interim document. There is still one full year of the Synod to take place in which they will then put together their final document to go to Pope Francis. So that is just keep that context in mind when those news reports start coming out this weekend with the conclusion of the First General Assembly of the Synod.
And the reminder from Archbishop Berlio to get involved, laity. So thank you so much, Catherine. We'll leave it right there.
Thanks, Montse.